So let me make this clear. Do not buy those little bags of onion bulbs you see at a big box store. I know it may be very, very tempting. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an amazing day. It is Thursday, September 5th here in South Georgia, and I was just about to get my onion seeds started in the greenhouse here behind me, but before I do, I thought it would be a great time to talk about the different types of onions, or three main categories of onions, as I would put it. There seems to be a lot of confusion out there on when to plant certain types of onions, how to plant certain types of onions, whether you plant seeds, bulbs, or plants. So in today's video, we're going to go through those three main categories of onions and break it all down for you. So let's jump right into it. Category number one would be bunching onions. These are also often called spring onions. So you can usually find these at the grocery store in the produce section, kind of near where the herbs are. You'll find them wrapped up in a little bundle with a rubber band. Those tiny little thin onions, those are what we call bunching onions, because you grow them in bunches, and when you harvest them, you pull up a bunch at the time. So almost anywhere you live, I guess unless you're in the extreme northern part of the country, you can plant bunching onions in the fall. So you want to plant bunching onions or spring onions from seed. So you would need to buy a pack of seeds, and you want to plant these really, really thick. You don't have to plant them in an in-ground garden. You can plant them in a raised bed or even a little pot or small container. You just want to sprinkle those seeds really, really thick over the soil. That's kind of how they were designed to be planted, to be grown really densely in bunches. And once those bunching onions start to grow, you can cut those green tops at any time you like, or you can pull up the entire plant in a bunch. Most people use these as a one-time harvest, so you just grab you a bunch of them, pull them up, and use the entire onion in whatever you're cooking. Now some people will grow these in a more permanent spot as opposed to just replanting them every fall. Maybe you've got a bed or a container dedicated to bunching onions, and they'll let them volunteer, and then they'll come back up once those seeds that have fallen to the ground germinate. Either way, bunching onions are great because they're relatively fast growing compared to the other two categories we're going to talk about here today. And you can get some nice green onion tops, and the little white piece on the end of them, the piece that sits in the ground, is pretty tasty too. Then we have category number two, which I like to call perennial onions, but you'll also hear them called multiplying onions. Now, unlike the bunching onions, which pretty much grow and look the same regardless of what variety you plant, these perennial onions can look and behave quite differently depending on the variety you plant. And there are a lot of different varieties out there. I'll show you some in just a minute. Now, perennial onions are typically planted from a tiny little bulb like this. This is an Egyptian walking onion bulb, but you can also plant them from plants, because these things multiply and divide. Maybe you have a friend that has some perennial onions growing, they give you a little clump of those, you can split those up and plant those in your garden. But typically they start out as a little bulb. So with these perennial onions, as I'll show you here in a minute, you'll start out with one plant shooting up from this little bulb here, but quickly they'll multiply into quite a few plants and a nice little cluster there. Bunching onions, although they look a lot like these perennial onions, do not do that. They do not multiply and divide. So that's the important distinction there. That's where a lot of the confusion is at. Bunching onions are planted from seeds. They don't divide and multiply. Perennial onions are planted from little bulbs. They do divide and multiply. So in this pot here, I have some potato onions, which is one type of perennial onion. These actually died back a good bit when it was really hot in, say, late July, early August, but you can see now they have resprouted and they're looking great. If we look down there, we can see all the division that has taken place. Like I said, these do look a lot like a bunching onion, where I just came in here and planted the seeds really thick, but it is different. These are multiplying on their own, whereas a bunching onion won't do that. And here's another perennial onion that does pretty well for us. Now this is where some of the confusion comes into play. This one here is called white Welsh bunching onion. That's what it was called when I bought a plant of this variety. But this is not a bunching onion in my book. This is a perennial or multiplying onion. The plants on this variety get a lot bigger than those potato onions and some of the ones I'll show you in a minute. But you can see down there how those have divided and multiplied into quite a few plants. Here's another perennial onion. This is the Egyptian walking onion. I showed you the bulbs for this one earlier. So these divide at the base, much like all perennial onions do. You can see those plants there have multiplied quite a bit from just putting a few bulbs in the ground. And these are supposed to form little bulbs on the top. That's why they call them walking onions. Mine have yet to do that, but they have divided like crazy at the bottom there. And the last one I'll show you here is technically a shallot. These are called Louisiana evergreen shallots, but they grow and behave much like all these other perennial onions I have shown you. So we plant the little bulbs in the ground, and you can see those plants have already started to multiply quite a bit. Now when it gets really hot in the summer, these plants will die back a little bit, and the bulbs at the base of those plants will start to enlarge a little bit. That's where you get your shallot. So although there are some subtle differences from one perennial or multiplying onion variety to the next, the concept is pretty much the same. We're putting a little bulb in the ground or grabbing a plant from an existing cluster, and we're going to get continued multiplication there. We can use those green onion tops anytime we want. Some varieties are going to produce a bulb at the top, some produce a bulb in the soil, some don't produce a little bulb at all. You just mainly use those green onion tops. So we covered bunching onions, aka spring onions, and we covered perennial onions, aka multiplying onions. Now let's talk about bulbing onions. These are the bigger onions. This is what most people think about when they hear the word onion. Now these here aren't very big, but you get my point. These are actually some that we harvested back in May that still feel pretty decent after sitting under the barn a few months. Now, unlike bunching onions where we're planting those seeds directly in our garden, or perennial onions where we're starting from that little bitty bulb, with bulbing onions, we got to plant plants. Now, you can either grow your own bulbing onion plants, or you can buy bulbing onion plants online, or sometimes your local feed and seed store will have them. Also, unlike bunching and perennial onions, these bulbing onions are day length sensitive. So the varieties I grow down here are not the same varieties that gardeners up north or even in the middle of the country should be growing. So bulbing onions have two distinct growing phases. They have the vegetative phase and then the bulbing phase. That's when this thing starts to enlarge. That bulbing is triggered by day length. So down here we grow short day onions. Those are usually starting to bulb when day length reaches, say, 10 to 12 hours. In the middle of the country, they grow intermediate day onions. In the northern part of the country, they grow long day onions. So given the day length that you get during the warmer months in different parts of the country, you have to grow different types of bulbing onions. Now that may sound a little confusing to a new gardener, but if you go to our website, lazydogfarm.com, and look at one of our onion seed pages, you'll see a nice little map there that kind of breaks it down for you, lets you know which type you should be growing. Also, unlike bunching onions or perennial onions that you can plant in the fall pretty much anywhere you live, you're not going to want to plant bulbing onions in the fall like we do unless you live in a short day region, and maybe if you live kind of towards the bottom of that short day region. Because if you plant these in the fall and you regularly get below 20 degrees, it's probably going to zap those plants pretty hard. So you need to be in a more southern climate to grow bulbing onions or to plant bulbing onions in the fall. So probably later today I'm going to get my short day onions started in some seed trays here in the greenhouse behind me. I like to grow out my own onion plants because I have some varieties here that I really like to grow that perform well for me. Can't really buy plants for these varieties. Now, one really common mistake amongst new gardeners, I hear it every single year. People message us and say, I don't know why my onions won't get very big. And I say, what varieties did you plant? And they say, I don't know. I just went to Walmart, Lowe's, or Home Depot and bought a bag of these little onion bulbs and planted those. So let me make this clear. Do not buy those little bags of onion bulbs you see at a big box store. I know it may be very, very tempting if you see those while you're walking around the garden section, but I can't think of any reason to buy those. Those are not going to give you a nice big onion. What those are tiny little immature versions of these that were harvested early, allowed to dry out, and they pack them in the bags and sell them. Yeah, they'll grow some green top, but you're never going to get a nice big onion out of those. So if you're trying to grow larger slicing onions, what we call bulbing onions, you either got to grow your own plants from seed, find somewhere that's got onion plants, make sure they are the right day length for your area, short day, intermediate day, or long day, and put them in the ground at the right time. For us down here in the deep south, that's early November. For those of you in the middle of the country, that's probably late winter. For those of you in the northern part of the country, that's probably late winter, early spring. So to recap all this, bunching onions, you're going to plant those from seed directly in your garden. Plant them in the fall no matter where you live. If it gets really cold, yes, that may eventually zap them, but you'll get plenty of nice green onion tops before that happens. And the perennial onions, you're going to plant from little bulbs like this. Now, of all the varieties I showed you earlier, the only ones we have available currently are these Egyptian walking onions. But you'll put these little bulbs in the ground in the fall, no matter where you live. These aren't day length sensitive, so you can plant them right now. And then the large onions, the bulbing onions, you got to make sure you pick the right day length type for your area and plant them at the right time. Either start your own seeds, grow your own onion plants, or go buy some onion plants. So hopefully with some of those distinctions we made there, we're able to clear up some of the onion confusion out there. A lot of terms are used interchangeably when folks are talking about onions. Perfect example, that white Welsh bunching onion I showed you earlier that I wouldn't technically consider to be a bunching onion. So that's where a lot of the confusion generates, is terms being used all interchangeably there. But if you keep in mind those three distinct categories, how those are planted, how those are grown, I think you'll be on the right track. And if you want to learn how to grow your own bulbing onion plants, so you don't have to go out and buy plants, watch this video right here. We'll break down the process step by step, show you the trays, the soil we use, all that good stuff, so you can grow out some nice onion plants. So check that out. We'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.